Before I move on to another grid drawing exercise, I'm just going to show you the work of Ewan Uglow. He was a British painter, and I think his dates are 1932 to 2000. He's associated with the Euston Road group in London. Now, the reason why we're looking at him is you can see this grid construction within his work. He plots. I would describe him as a very methodical artist. He doesn't enter into a piece of work and just start. He spends a long time posing his subjects and then accurately plotting the information. And these marks, these plot marks that lots of artists cover and paint over, Uglow keeps within the work, and you can see them in many different works right to the end. I like them. I like the truth about the mark making and the construction coming through to the final stages. Some people don't. You could paint them out. There's a stillness about them. They're very, very calculated. You can see the tones and slabs of colour have been applied within this framework of the drawing. Now remember, I like drawing and I like construction, so this is why I'm showing you this particular artist's work. You might find other artists whose style is more appropriate to your own. Remember, the style of the artwork also relates to the personality of the artist. So your personality might be more spontaneous, and it's quite useful to have some of this control. And if you're quite methodical, it's quite nice to loosen up at times, so to play around with your natural preferences. So moving on to do another grid drawing and just walk you through it. And this is a good way to start plotting. You can plot from life, but obviously a grid over a two-dimensional image is quite a good starting point. There are some instructions at the top which might help you. And on this particular one, I've done a little starting exercise. Now, if you think about what we have here, we have a photograph of a toy dinosaur. It's in black and white because we're going to do some tonal work onto it. There's a grid over the top of it, and the x-axis is labelled A, B, C, D, and the y-axis is labelled 1, 2, 3, 4. There is a corresponding grid, and I'm now going to move on to start plotting. In the instructions, I make a comment to look for this point here. It's on the border between C and D1. I describe it as about 3/4 of the way up the box. I'm just going to plot a mark where it's going to be. Gone a bit high there. I'm going to replot. So I'm going to plot a point here. Now you might be wondering why I'm working with a red pencil, because at this stage I want to show you all the plots. See what I'm doing now? I'm taking a measurement from the tip of the pencil to the edge of the frame. It's another way to do this. If I've taken a measurement there, I'm not going to make a second measurement. I'm going to guess the other one's there. Now I'm going to do a little half line up the box. So what you can see is with the red, the construction lines I'm putting in. So the dinosaur's tail comes to about there. It's quite rounded. So I'm beginning to construct and draw into it. Now at this point, between here and here, we don't have a straight line. If you think about the negative space, that's the positive object. The negative space is the area in the background. I'm going to look at that shape now that I've just constructed there. And that's helping me find that line by looking at the shape that's in the gap. So you can see how I'm beginning to work into a section. At the moment I'm drawing no detail, I'm just looking at the shape. That point is quite close to the line over there. See how I draw a crosshair, and does that go straight? No. If I draw a straight line in, I know that it comes down a little bit, bends up, and it comes round. That point is about there. And now I could take a measurement, drop my pencil, but I could take a measurement and pop it in, fairly accurate. The more you do this, the more accurate you naturally become. That's why I think it's got great value when you're learning to draw and plot. When you're working from a two-dimensional image, obviously it's quite easy. You can take any image from a magazine and put it on a piece of paper, draw a grid over it, draw a corresponding grid, and off you go. You can then start doing it from life. You can start plotting things that are in front of you. It's easier to show you that one in the classroom because there are some good tips to it that I can demonstrate quite easily. So you can see how I'm just working around and plotting away. don't worry about drawing on the image you're working from. This is a true process. It isn't a cheat. You are taking measurements and learning to transfer them. So I've just spent a few minutes continuing with the red pencil crayon, just drawing around the image. Now I appreciate you might not have a colour pencil crayon to hand. We're not in a classroom where we can share equipment in the usual way. But if you do this at home or try it out again, it's quite an interesting way of doing it. And some of the Euston Road artists that I mentioned did work with a different colour into the base, and that would come through like Ewan Uglow's marks through to the final image. Now I'm going to take my standard pencil and I'm going to start drawing some of the detail back in. As I'm doing this, I might do some corrections along the way. So as I start onto the eye, I realise that the pupil in the eye is slightly across the line a little bit further than I've drawn it. So I'm now applying some mark making. I'm not just drawing the line, I'm building up some texture. And I'm just going to continue now working into some of the tricky areas, say around the mouth and the teeth. At the moment you can say I've measured out roughly where they are, but I've not particularly defined them. So say the top of that particular tooth is a little bit more pointy shape to it and rounded at the top and pointy at the bottom. So I'm filling in the negative space, leaving the light kind of like slightly smaller. So they're not like just gappy teeth like you draw a white area and draw some lines across them. You're actually looking at the shape, the negative space, building up this tone above. These little triangular bits sticking up there. Now ultimately no one's really comparing the object and your drawing, so there can be some degree of variation. I talked to you before about drawing organic objects where they're not like the cube and the sphere, where something's slightly out might not be that noticeable and you might not worry about it too much. So just keep building up some tone, pressing harder. Say that the edge there, the ridge of the eye, it's dark along the top, quite dark. It's like the material, the plastic's worn away a little bit, the paint that's on the plastic. That nose looks a little bit more domed as it comes down, but I'm not drawing a heavy line in there because there isn't a heavy outline around here. Remember my Bart Simpson drawings from other videos where there isn't an outline, you don't need one. So I'm working across the whole image here, just different parts of it. The shading, a bit of texture. This bit you'll enjoy more as well. I quite like this kind of building up stage of the drawing. You see the image starting to emerge. Now hopefully you're beginning to see those little bits of red are still there coming through, and a bit like the Ewan Uglow or the Euston Road group, you see some other qualities about it. Now at the back here I've just drawn a kind of area, but I can see that that's the other teeth at the back. So shall I draw it exactly accurate, or shall I just create a similar type look to it? As long as I've got a similar look in there, that'll probably work okay. That's quite a big dark area in the open mouth. Comes across here. But this mouth continues, you see his jaw, top jaw line continues over here. It's a bit of a shady area into there. So I'm working around it in quite a logical way. This is the only way I can make sense of something when I'm doing it. If you look at it and think it's a bit like this and just give it a rough shape, it might not work. But if you structure and work around quite logically, you might get something that you feel is informed. It's a smoother line as it comes back. See the dark bits between these teeth, one's on the line. It kind of softens out. Now into this area, and there is some range, there's some solid white bits. Remember, we can leave the white of the paper. And then there's some mid-tone, so I might just put a range of little tones and marks in. You can play with those marks, they don't have to be exactly as they are here. Build up some different textures and cracks. Think what you think your, I don't know, is he a T-Rex? Your T-Rex surface texture would be like. We're open to a bit of artist's interpretation here, as we don't quite know. So I'm building up. Now I'm going to move to a completely different area because I want to show you something, and this relates to the directional line if you've done any of those videos already. Into here, notice there are some curved lines. You can see them onto the tail as well over here. They're not just flat, they've got a slight bit of shape to them, suggesting volume. So if I start to put a few lines into here, even if they are not exactly the same, you begin to see some of that volume. I can see them on the feet, on the legs. So a little bit of drawing and doodling into your image onto the belly. Look, there they are again. Here we go. Now they don't go all the way around because he's got more scaly texture on here, and he's got this pattern down his back. You can see them there. So these little bits of line, if I put them in now, are going to help me later. Now you might get a bit creative and decide to add a few where there weren't a few. Thinking about the volume, you might be getting confident now with volume. Remember, drawing is about creating an illusion, so you might want to be a bit more inventive as you go along once you have a good accurate base. I'll come back to you when I've done a bit more. Right, so you can begin to see I'm beginning to build up some more tones. I'm following the map, I'm calling it a map of the areas that you can see in here, using the grid to help me place these sections. But I'm not being 100% true to it, I'm being a bit creative. I'm enjoying just making marks and textures. Now, you have to think about some of this, the image, because it will help you with your drawing. Now, this is the front arm, that is the back arm, and that is the claw on the back arm. Now, if you start thinking about it and understand it, it will help you make choices that will look more accurate. So it's quite dark across the top bit there. Now his belly comes up here, and there isn't a very hard line, there's no Bart Simpson outline around it. It's quite light into there. And that is also quite dark. It's not solid all over, it's kind of darker on the claw, lighter. See, that little bit of variation gives it a little bit more form. Remember, if you've done any of the sheets about form, you'll understand how a little bit of tone can create the illusion of depth. It's quite dark under here. This is like the bottom of this claw. There's a light bit there. So I'm not making this bit up so much. I'm thinking about what's happening here. That's the second claw, and that's the third one as it's going away over there. It's dark on there, but it's light at this point. No, it's kind of the top of the arm. It's light there, but the light is on the far away one. But I'd say there probably is a little bit of ridge light along the top. So this is where a bit of thinking and observation really helps. I'm trying to get a bit of volume in there. Those lines, remember that I've got a bit of curved directional line into it, are going to help me create a bit of volume into here. So I'm handling the back of the arm in a slightly different way, but giving it that dark tone, because I want this section to be different from that one. That's the belly, and that's wrapping around and going underneath. I've already drawn those little guidelines which are giving it some direction. If you look at them, they're kind of like got little ridges of tone coming up, slightly made up in its pattern there, but it's doing what I need it to do. No heavy outline, just blended in. Now at that point there's another line that's quite distinctive there, just a change in tone and texture as it moves to the scales of the body from the kind of ridgy of the underbelly. Kind of dark at the top of here, and then I'm now handling the top of this thigh area. So See how I'm doing something different? I'm giving a bit of volume. Look, I'm putting some directional marks into it as I'm going. Now, as you start drawing, you forget about doing these things. You just start naturally doing them, and that's where you ultimately want to be, that unconscious place where it just is in your repertoire and your language, and you start drawing this way. So I'm building up a bit of volume into there. I'm looking forward to doing it around these claws. Remember, what I did up here was quite tricky, but I can see a little bit more information in there. So another little check in here. What I've done is I've drawn the markings. These are painted markings on the back of the dinosaur. If you had it the dinosaur orientated so you could see its full back, you'd see them wrap around. So I've drawn those in quite systematically, and I've got them all down. So now what I'm doing is I'm now looking at these textures, these little smaller marks, and I'm using the grid to work out roughly where they are. Now obviously they don't have to be bang on the right spot because we're implying the texture. We are not necessarily making it exactly now into this section as it is here. So you can see I'm applying these, and I can continue to do that systematically all the way down the tail. There's quite a few down here. So it's not like I'm finishing a whole section, I'm just working in bits. Still adding little bits of texture, developing a technique that's doing the job reasonably well. So not necessarily being detailed and consistent, just applying a similar formula across these areas. Now when I've done that, I'll go and do something else, which might be starting to put this mid-tone. If you see, there's white of the paper coming from here, but there's more of a mid-tone there. So in some areas it's slightly darker, in some lighter. So this is how I've developed the final image, just by adding in little bits. So I'm just adding little bits of mid-tone. And then that section might do as it is. I might continue to add a little bit more around it, working and finishing off. And in reality, I've probably got enough texture on there that would describe the dinosaur and suggest the little toy model. If you want to work your outline in a little bit firmer, you can do, but you don't want it to be Bart Simpson. So in places I might just build it up, but remember to work it into the edge of the image so it doesn't have a big flat solid outline around it. Remember, you do not need an outline everywhere to convey an edge. Sometimes you can just suggest it. You might want to keep building on textures and marks. You might want to add a little bit more tone into places. Remember, think about the volume with your tone, helping convey the three-dimensional form. And also think about the mark making and the direction into those marks to suggest volume. Give it a go.